Tonight, as the world outside grows quiet, let us drift back to a time of ancient legends, to a land where gods walked among mortals, and where beauty held a power beyond imagining, a power that could stir the hearts of kings and launch 1,000 ships across the tranquil Aegean Sea. Lie back, close your eyes, and let the gentle whisper of the past carry you to the sun-drenched shores of Sparta and the high walls of Troy, as we unwrap the story of Helen, the famed queen whose beauty became legend. Our story begins not with Helen herself, but with her mother, Leda, a queen of Sparta, renowned for her grace and loveliness. One soft evening, by the banks of the Eurotas River, Leda encountered a magnificent swan, a creature of such dazzling white plumage that it seemed to glow in the fading light. This was no ordinary swan, however, but mighty Zeus, king of the gods, who had taken this form to approach the queen. Their union, cloaked in divine mystery, led to a most unusual birth. Leda laid 2 eggs. From one came Castor and Clytemnestra, children of her mortal husband, King Tyndareus. From the other emerged the twins Pollux and Helen, children of Zeus himself, destined for extraordinary fates. Helen grew up in the sun-kissed palace of Sparta, a child of unparalleled beauty from her very first breath. Her skin was said to be like alabaster, her hair like spun gold, and her eyes the color of the clear Lacedaemonian sky. Even as a girl, her loveliness was legendary, a quiet radiance that drew all eyes to her. Yet she remained largely innocent of the stir her presence created. She spent her days in the gentle rhythms of Spartan life, learning the arts of the palace, walking through olive groves, and listening to the distant songs of the shepherds. However, even in her youth, the shadow of her extraordinary beauty began to fall. When she was still a maiden, barely a woman, the hero Theseus, king of Athens, heard tales of her divine charm. Driven by a desire to possess such peerless beauty, he and his friend Pirithous journeyed to Sparta and, in a daring act, abducted the young Helen. They carried her away to the fortress of Aphidne, intending to keep her there until she was old enough to be his bride. But her brothers, Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, were fierce and loyal. They mounted a swift rescue, liberating their sister and bringing her safely back to Sparta, a little shaken perhaps, but unharmed. This early event was a stark foreshadowing of the tumultuous life that lay ahead. As Helen blossomed into womanhood, her beauty became even more profound. A shimmering beacon that captivated the entire Greek world. Princes and kings from every city-state, from distant Ithaca to powerful Mycenae, heard the tales and began to converge upon Sparta, each hoping to win her hand. The palace courtyards overflowed with noblemen, their retinues, and their rich gifts. Among them were some of the most famous heroes of their age: Odysseus of Ithaca, Ajax the Greater, Diomedes, and the mighty Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae. King Tyndareus, Helen's earthly father, found himself in a difficult position. To choose one suitor was to offend all the others, risking a war right on his doorstep. It was Odysseus, known for his cunning and wisdom, who proposed a solution to the king's dilemma. He suggested that before Tyndareus made his choice, all the suitors should swear a solemn oath. This oath, known as the Oath of Tyndareus, bound them to accept Helen's chosen husband and, should anyone ever try to abduct her from him, to unite and come to his aid. One by one, the proud chieftains stepped forward, placing their hands upon a sacrificed horse, swearing allegiance to the future husband of Helen. This single oath, intended to prevent conflict, would ironically lay the foundation for the greatest war of their age. With the oath sworn Helen herself, guided by the quiet wisdom of her own heart and perhaps a whisper from the gods, made her choice. She chose Menelaus, the younger brother of Agamemnon. Menelaus was a respected warrior, a man of noble bearing and considerable wealth. His choice brought a sense of peace to Sparta, for he was a powerful ally, and his connection to Agamemnon ensured a strong alliance. The other suitors, bound by their oath, departed, some with heavy hearts, but all accepting the outcome. Helen and Menelaus were married in a grand ceremony, and Menelaus ascended to the throne of Sparta, inheriting his father-in-law's kingdom. For many years, Helen and Menelaus lived a life of peace and contentment in Sparta. They ruled justly, and Helen was a gracious queen, her beauty now softened by maturity and the quiet joy of her domestic life. They had a daughter, Hermione, who inherited some of her mother's remarkable beauty. The years passed in tranquil rhythm, marked by the changing seasons and the simple duties of royalty. It seemed, for a time, that the prophecy of her tumultuous life had been averted, that her beauty would only bring gentle harmony. But the threads of fate, once spun, are not easily unraveled. Far across the Aegean Sea, in the prosperous city of Troy, a different destiny was being woven. It all began with a wedding, the marriage of the sea nymph Thetis to the mortal Peleus. All the gods and goddesses were invited, except for one, Eris, the goddess of discord. Offended by this slight, Eris, in a moment of mischief, threw a golden apple into the feast, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." Immediately, 3 powerful goddesses laid claim to the apple: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Zeus, unwilling to choose between his wife and his daughters, decided that a mortal should be the judge. His choice fell upon Paris, a young prince of Troy, who, unknown to him, was living as a shepherd on Mount Ida. A prophecy had foretold that Paris would be the ruin of Troy, so his parents, King Priam and Queen Hecuba, had sent him away to be raised far from the city. Each goddess appeared before Paris, offering him a bribe in exchange for the golden apple. Hera promised him power and a vast kingdom. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in all battles. Aphrodite, however, offered him the most irresistible prize of all, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by the allure of such a promise, awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite. Little did he know, or perhaps he did, that this decision would ignite a fire that would consume his city and plunge the Greek world into a decade of war. The most beautiful woman in the world, of course, was Helen of Sparta. This fateful judgment set in motion the events that would shatter the peace of Sparta and forever change the course of history. The gentle tranquility of Helen's life was about to be irrevocably disturbed, as the goddess of love, bound by her promise, prepared to guide Paris to her side. Some time later, Paris, now fully recognized as a prince of Troy, embarked on a diplomatic mission to Sparta, though his true purpose was subtly guided by Aphrodite. He arrived with a grand retinue, his ships laden with gifts, and was received with the customary lavish hospitality of King Menelaus. Menelaus, unaware of the divine machinations at play, welcomed Paris warmly, offering him shelter and friendship. Helen, ever the gracious queen, played hostess, her luminous beauty undoubtedly captivating the Trojan prince from the moment he saw her. The air in the Spartan palace, though outwardly calm, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of impending destiny. A few days into Paris's visit, a crucial event called Menelaus away to Crete. His grandfather, Catreus, had died, and Menelaus felt it his duty to attend the funeral. He left Helen to entertain their guest, trusting in her virtue and the bonds of hospitality. He could not have known that he was leaving the most beautiful woman in the world and his entire kingdom vulnerable to the insidious influence of a goddess who had already promised Helen to another. The winds of fate were now blowing strongly, carrying Menelaus away just as Paris, guided by Aphrodite, made his move. What followed is a matter of ancient debate. Did Helen willingly elope with Paris, or was she abducted against her will, perhaps enchanted by Aphrodite's power? The myths vary, offering different shades to her story. Some say that Helen, overcome by Paris's charm and the compelling influence of Aphrodite's magic, fell deeply in love and chose to leave her husband and her home. Others portray her as a victim, drugged or overwhelmed by divine power, carried off by force, leaving behind her daughter Hermione in sorrow. Regardless of the exact circumstances, when Menelaus returned from Crete, he found his palace empty of both his wife and his Trojan guest. Along with Helen, Paris had plundered much of Menelaus's treasury, adding insult to injury. The betrayal was complete. Menelaus, heartbroken and enraged, immediately sought out his powerful brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. Together, they began to invoke the oath of Tyndareus, sending heralds across all of Greece to remind the former suitors of their sacred pledge. The summons went out to mighty warriors like Ajax, the wise Nestor, the valiant Diomedes, and the cunning Odysseus. Each chieftain, bound by honor and the ancient oath, began to gather his ships and his men. The quiet fields of Greece began to buzz with the sounds of preparations for war. The face that launched 1,000 ships was now literally setting them in motion. The massive Greek fleet, 1,000 strong, began to gather at Aulis, a sheltered bay on the eastern coast of mainland Greece. The sheer scale of the undertaking was immense, an unprecedented assembly of warriors and ships. However, unfavorable winds sent by the goddess Artemis prevented their departure. The seer Calchas revealed that Artemis was angered because Agamemnon had once boasted of his hunting prowess, or perhaps had offended her in some other way. To appease the goddess and gain fair winds, Agamemnon was told he must sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. This was a terrible choice, a king's agony. Agamemnon, after much internal struggle, lured Iphigenia to Aulis under the pretense of marrying her to Achilles. At the last moment, as the knife was about to fall, some versions say Artemis herself took pity and replaced Iphigenia with a deer, carrying the maiden away to serve as her priestess. Other versions say the sacrifice tragically occurred. In any case, the winds changed and the vast fleet, with a heavy heart, finally set sail for Troy. The voyage across the Aegean was long and arduous. The ships, filled with warriors eager for battle, cut through the azure waters, each oar stroke bringing them closer to the distant shores of Troy. The warriors spoke of Helen, some with admiration for her beauty, others with scorn for the trouble she had caused. Yet, all were united by the oath and the promise of glory. The anticipation grew with each passing day as the towering walls of Troy slowly began to emerge on the horizon. This journey marked the end of an era of relative peace and the beginning of a decade-long siege that would forever be etched into the annals of myth and history. Helen, far away within those very walls, could only imagine the immense force now bearing down upon her new home. Upon arriving at the Trojan shore, the Achaeans, as the Greeks were called, faced immediate resistance. The Trojans, led by Hector, the valiant son of King Priam, defended their land fiercely. The first years of the war were a series of skirmishes and raids, with the Achaeans establishing a fortified camp on the beachhead and slowly beginning to besiege the mighty city. Troy's walls were formidable, built, some said, with the help of the gods themselves, making a direct assault seem impossible. The war settled into a long, grueling stalemate, a test of endurance and will, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Inside the walls of Troy, Helen's life was a complex tapestry of privilege and sorrow. She was the queen of Paris, but she was also a captive of circumstance, a woman whose beauty had ignited a devastating war. The Trojan elders, seeing her magnificent form, often whispered that such beauty was worth the struggle, yet her presence also brought great anguish. She would often walk the battlements of the city, looking out at the Greek camp, a mix of longing and regret in her heart. She recognized many of the Greek heroes, remembering them from her life in Sparta, from the days when they were her suitors. She missed her daughter Hermione and, perhaps, even Menelaus. Paris, for his part, loved her deeply, but their love was forever overshadowed by the conflict it had caused. The war dragged on for 9 long years, a decade of endless fighting, heroism, and immense suffering. Many brave warriors on both sides fell. The greatest heroes of the Achaeans, Achilles and Ajax, earned their legendary status through countless deeds of valor. On the Trojan side, Hector stood as the city's unwavering shield, a paragon of courage and nobility. Within the city, food became scarce and the populace endured constant fear and hardship. Helen, though protected as a queen, would have felt the weight of this suffering deeply, understanding her unwitting role in the tragedy. The air was thick with lamentations for the fallen and the constant clang of battle. The war was no longer just about Helen. It had become a contest of honor, vengeance, and destiny between two great civilizations. One of the most tragic events of the war was the death of Hector. Enraged by the killing of his dear friend Patroclus, Achilles, who had withdrawn from battle due to a dispute with Agamemnon, returned to the fray. He sought out Hector, Troy's mightiest defender, and in a fierce duel before the Scaean gates, Achilles slew him. The death of Hector was a crushing blow to the Trojans, for he was their hope, their protector. His loss signaled a turning point, a dark omen for the fate of the city. Helen mourned Hector deeply, seeing him as a kind and gentle soul who had always treated her with respect despite the chaos she embodied. As the 10th year of the war wore on, and with the death of Achilles himself, shot by Paris with an arrow guided by Apollo, the Greeks grew desperate. The city of Troy seemed impregnable. It was the cunning Odysseus who finally conceived of a plan that would bypass the mighty walls. He proposed building a colossal wooden horse, large enough to hold a contingent of elite Greek warriors within its hollow belly. The rest of the Greek fleet would then pretend to abandon the siege, sailing away just far enough to be out of sight, making it appear as though they had given up. After much deliberation, the plan was put into action. The Greeks constructed the enormous horse, a masterpiece of deception. A single Greek soldier, Sinon, was left behind to tell a carefully crafted tale to the Trojans, that the horse was an offering to Athena meant to ensure the Greeks a safe voyage home, and that it was too large to be brought inside the city walls for fear of angering the goddess. He claimed the Greeks had left it as a gift, hoping the Trojans would reject it and thus incur Athena's wrath. The Trojans, after 10 years of unrelenting siege, were weary and longed for peace. Despite the warnings of the priest Laocoon, who famously said, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," and Cassandra, Priam's prophetess daughter, whose prophecies were fated never to be believed, the Trojans were overjoyed. They interpreted the Greek retreat and the presence of the horse as a sign of victory. They pulled down a section of their beloved city walls to bring the magnificent wooden horse inside, celebrating their supposed triumph late into the night. Helen, watching from within the city, must have felt a chilling mix of dread and faint hope, sensing the precariousness of their position, perhaps even recognizing the familiar cunning of Odysseus in this strange gift. As darkness fell and the city of Troy lay in a drunken slumber of celebration, the Greek warriors emerged from the belly of the horse. They swiftly opened the city gates, signaling to the returning Greek fleet with torches. The Achaean army poured into the city, catching the Trojans completely by surprise. What followed was a night of horrific carnage and destruction. The city that had defied them for so long was now utterly vulnerable. Troy, the magnificent city, fell in a single, brutal night, engulfed in flames and the shouts of battle. The 10-year war had come to its devastating end, brought down not by strength, but by guile. Amidst the chaos and destruction, Menelaus, burning with vengeance, sought out Helen. He found her in the palace, perhaps in the chambers she once shared with Paris, who had also fallen in the battle. Some legends say Menelaus raised his sword to strike her down, but upon seeing her face, her enduring, captivating beauty, his anger melted away. He dropped his sword, overcome by her charm, the love he once bore her reigniting. Other stories suggest a less dramatic reunion, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared past amidst the ruins of their present. Whatever the truth, Helen was now once again with Menelaus, her fate inextricably linked to his. The return journey for the Achaeans was almost as perilous as the war itself. The gods, angered by the Greeks' impiety during the sack of Troy, sent terrible storms and inflicted various hardships upon their homeward-bound fleets. Menelaus and Helen endured a long, wandering voyage, taking years to finally reach Sparta. They were blown off course, visiting many distant lands, including Egypt, before the benevolent winds eventually guided them home. Through all this, Helen remained by Menelaus's side, perhaps a changed woman, humbled by the immense cost of her beauty and the suffering she had indirectly caused. Finally, after decades of tumultuous events, Helen and Menelaus returned to Sparta. They resumed their rule, and it is said that they lived out the rest of their days in peace, reigning justly over their kingdom. The scars of war remained, both on the land and in their hearts, but the fury had subsided. Helen, the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, lived to a ripe old age, her extraordinary beauty perhaps still shimmering, but now tempered by wisdom and the quiet dignity of a queen who had seen the rise and fall of nations. Her story serves as a timeless reminder of the power of beauty, the complexity of fate, and the enduring nature of myth. And so the epic tale of Helen of Troy, the woman of unparalleled beauty, draws to a gentle close. Her story, woven into the very fabric of Greek mythology, continues to whisper through the ages, reminding us of the intricate dance between mortals and gods, love and war, and the profound impact a single life can have. May the echoes of this ancient legend bring you peaceful dreams tonight. Sleep well, and if you enjoyed this journey into the quiet wisdom of myth, consider subscribing to MythOwl for more stories to lull you into slumber. Good night.